President of the Saharawi Arab Democratic Republic, Brahim Ghali, will meet with President Cyril Ramaphosa in Pretoria later this morning. These are live visuals from the Union buildings, and we'll take you through to our colleague Khayelihle Khumalo at some point in the show. Another headline: Zimbabwe get their T20 World Cup campaign in Australia off to a winning start. Hello once again, and thanks for staying with us into the second hour of the agenda here on the SABC News channel. My name is Desiree Jauke Mpotime, and Trafosa Nzwilingwe alternate with sign language. Today hosting the Saharawi Republic President Brahim Ghali in Pretoria, the Ambassador of the Saharawi Republic Mohamed Yeslem Beisat Deich in South Africa says the visit is a clear indication that South Africa and his country have strong bonds at a time where the Saharawi people are fighting for freedom. For more on this, let's bring in Khayelihle Khumalo, who's been watching the story since this morning. A very good morning to you once again, Kaya. Which activities, or rather, what's the latest where you are?
Well, absolutely, Desiree. You can see really just behind us that everything is in order as we're waiting with great anticipation for President Ghali to arrive here at the Union buildings. Obviously, you know, whenever you speak to the government ministers, something that is very primary in this regard has to do with the self-determination of the people of Western Sahara. You know that this is Africa's last remaining colony. And of course, Desiree, we also do have our own international editor here, Sophie Mugwen. I'm just going to bring her into this conversation as we look into this critical issue. Sophie, every time you go to, for example, the ANC conference, there's always the question of Western Sahara. South Africa has always been supportive of their plight for freedom. Tell us about the significance of this visit by President Ghali.
Well, it's quite important because it will once again put the struggle of the people of Western Sahara on the map. Because clearly, as we are doing now with the live coverage and many of our colleagues who are here, both local and international journalists, this story will be making headlines in different newsrooms today. And therefore, you are bringing back and you are reminding the Africans on the continent and the international community that you still have a country on the continent that is being occupied by another African country, part of its territory, and therefore the struggle continues. And therefore it is important then for those who are responsible to remember that you still have this Saharawi question. Institutions or the continental body such as the African Union, the United Nations, you are again reminding them that you still have to resolve the issue of Western Sahara.
And what does it mean? Because we go back to 2017 when Morocco was readmitted into the AU, there was a huge outcry, and South Africa once again was leading that voice, you know, in the SADC region, Namibia as well, and among other countries. Now it's 2022, not much progress has been made in this regard.
Let us remember that it is Morocco that took a decision to suspend its participation within the African Union. It was not African Union saying don't participate, but the African Union that was launched in South Africa, the first chairperson of that continental body after the transformation of the OAU, Thabo Mbeki taking the helm, it was clear that South Africa was going to ensure that where there are challenges on the continent, challenges that are similar to what we experienced, they have to be addressed. And therefore the issue of Saharawi was going to be alive and well. And therefore Morocco decided to pull out its readmission. Well, it is an African country, and it is better when it is within the African Union, so that member countries and leaders of the continent can engage Morocco to say what you are doing is wrong. And I think many countries on the continent have done just that, particularly the SADC region. The SADC region has been very firm in terms of ensuring that they do fight for the liberation of the Saharawi people. But you have countries on the continent that are almost like owing Morocco, because Morocco is a very rich country, and therefore using its resources, it is able to influence certain decisions. And that is why when you go to the Pan-African Parliament, you can see Morocco's influence. When we were at the AU just before COVID-19 in 2020, when I was there at the AU precinct, everywhere you go, there was a branding of Morocco, and you can see that it has got an influence. It doesn't mean that Morocco is not an African country, and therefore it will continue to fight for its prominence within the continent. But then leaders must always remind them that there's this outstanding matter. This is the only part of Africa that is still under occupation.
And do you think it sees an indictment on the African Union? Because you go back to the days of OAU, you look at the United Nations as well. All of them, they've tried, but the issue is just unresolved. And it's quite interesting, Sophie, because lately now we talk about the so-called annexation of Ukraine. You do have those who are saying we need also that strong condemnation to say that annexation of a territorial space of another country is absolutely wrong. But on Western Sahara, there's a great deal of silence.
You know, it speaks to who dictates the global agenda. Your powerful nations will always do that. You know that they are even ignoring the plight of the people of Palestine because there's no vested interest. You look at Saharawi, a very poor country, and therefore they don't care. They don't have interest. They are not invested in that country. It's a poor country on the continent, and therefore really your influential countries within the G7, the G20, including some of the BRICS member countries, only South Africa is still consistent because of the experience and the history of South Africa. We know how difficult it is to be oppressed, and therefore there's no way South Africa will not continue to talk about that occupation.
And just, Sophie, just to give you a sense of some of the ministers that we're spotting, I'm seeing, of course, the Minister of Social Development, that's, of course, Lindiwe Zulu, alongside Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga. And I'm just looking at all these, primary issues, education, social development. These are very important issues, especially when you look at the context of Western Sahara, a country that's facing quite a number of social challenges, and also the women minister also being around as well.
Yes, social issues. This is a poor country. You therefore have to address their social challenges and poverty. You also have to address the issue of education, the issue of women. We know that women in that part of the continent are really, really suffering. 3 years ago, our former colleague Saraki Mane visited the country. And when she came back, she said to me, Sophie, I've been to many African countries. I've seen challenges on the continent, but this one, it does hit very hard. And therefore, women in particular. And therefore, you expect agreements in terms of what is South Africa going to do to help the women in that part of the continent. You have social development minister. How do we assist them? You have other ministries of education. How do we ensure that you support them? Because we know that education is very key to the emancipation of any nation.
And maybe just before we bring it back to the studio, Sophie, obviously we see that the top diplomat, Dr. Pandor, is out of the country, but we spoke to the Deputy Minister of International Relations, and once again speaking about the issue of development, but also saying this is really at the heart of South Africa's foreign policy when it comes to Pan-Africanism, sympathizing with the countries that are still oppressed, the countries that are still yearning to see themselves, being uplifted from the shackles of poverty.
Yes, that is, South Africa's foreign policy is anchored around peace, security, stability, comfort and prosperity. And therefore, that is why South Africa will always extend its hand to those countries. We didn't shy away to be involved in the CAR. We didn't shy away to be involved in the DRC. We are not looking and folding our arms as a country on a situation like this one. And therefore, this is what the policy of South Africa is all about. You look at what's happening in Ukraine. The people are saying, why are we not firm in terms of what's happening? That's the issue. Peace and stability at all times, and freedom at all times.
Absolutely, Sophie. Of course, that's our international editor. So we're all waiting here with great anticipation for the two leaders to meet, and then there'll be a welcome ceremony. Then the two leaders, President Ramaphosa and President Ghali, will have an opportunity to interact and talk about an array of issues. And obviously, quite a very important issue as well will have to be around economic development. We know that's quite important, as most countries are still trying to recover from the ashes of COVID-19, so to speak. So definitely do stay here on SABC News for very comprehensive coverage.